My name is Claire, and my story begins on an ordinary Thursday evening, or so I thought. Life had been fairly predictable since my husband, James, and I settled into our modest suburban home. James worked as an accountant, meticulous and grounded in his routines, while I ran a small bakery in town. Though we didn't have children yet, we often talked about the possibility. Life, while not exciting, felt stable. But everything changed that night. I had just finished preparing dinner when James walked through the door, his face unusually tense. His typical greeting was replaced by an awkward silence. He sat at the table, absently stirring his soup. "Claire, we need to talk," he said in a low voice, and the words sent a chill down my spine. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. "My parents, they're coming to stay with us?" I blinked, trying to process the statement. James's parents were distant figures in my life, only making an appearance during holiday dinners. "How long?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. "Indefinitely," he admitted, his eyes darting away. "Why?" I asked, bewildered. James hesitated before answering. "They sold their house. They're having some financial trouble and don't have anywhere else to go." A wave of panic surged through me. Our home was small, barely enough for the two of us. James's parents were difficult. His mother, Margaret, had a sharp tongue, and his father, Harold, had an air of entitlement that always made me feel like an outsider. But James's expression, filled with guilt and helplessness, made it hard for me to argue. "Okay," I said finally, my voice tight. "But we need to set some boundaries." James nodded, though he didn't seem confident. "Of course." 3 days later, Margaret and Harold arrived, bringing far more than I expected. Multiple suitcases, boxes of knickknacks, and even a recliner Harold insisted was his. Our living room quickly became a maze of their belongings. Margaret immediately took charge, rearranging my kitchen without asking, while Harold claimed the recliner as his throne and barked orders about what he wanted for dinner. At first, I tried to stay positive. "It's temporary," I told myself. "They'll find their footing soon." But days turned into weeks, and their presence began to feel more permanent. Margaret started criticizing everything I did, how I folded the laundry, how I seasoned my food. Harold's demands grew louder, his tone more dismissive. James, always the peacemaker, stayed silent, leaving me to navigate the storm alone. One night, after yet another tense dinner, I confronted James. "This isn't working," I said. "They're treating me like a servant, and you're doing nothing about it." James looked cornered. "They're my parents, Claire. What am I supposed to do? Kick them out?" "I'm not asking you to kick them out. I'm asking you to stand up for me. This is our house, not theirs." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll talk to them," he promised, though his tone lacked conviction. The next day, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. "James told me you're unhappy with us being here," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. I froze, unsure how to respond. "I just think we need to communicate better," I said carefully. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "We're family, Claire. Families stick together no matter what. If you can't understand that, maybe you're not cut out to be part of this one." Her words stung, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to escalate the tension, even though every part of me screamed to defend myself. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could endure this. As weeks turned into months, the situation worsened. Margaret began hosting tea parties with her friends in our living room, often without informing me. Harold started making subtle changes to the house, replacing curtains and rearranging furniture, all without consulting us. My home no longer felt like mine. One evening, after closing the bakery late, I came home to find the locks changed. Panic set in as I jiggled the doorknob. After several minutes, Margaret opened the door, looking completely unbothered. "Why are the locks changed?" I demanded. "Oh, Harold thought the old ones weren't secure," she said breezily. "We've already made copies for you and James." I was livid. "You didn't think to ask us? This is our house." Margaret shrugged. "We were just thinking about everyone's safety. You should be grateful." That night, I confronted James again. "They've gone too far. They changed the locks without telling us. James looked defeated. "I'll talk to them," he said, the same empty promise as before. But the final straw came one rainy Saturday afternoon. I returned home from grocery shopping to find Margaret in our bedroom, rifling through my drawers. My voice quivered with anger as I demanded, but Margaret didn't even flinch. She continued to organize, completely unfazed. "You keep everything in such a mess," I snapped. "Get out. Get out of my room." Margaret recoiled, clearly surprised by my outburst, but she only replied, "There's no need to shout," before leaving. I collapsed onto the bed, my hand trembling. It hit me then. I couldn't continue living like this. That night, I packed a bag and called my sister Rachel, asking if I could stay with her for a while. Without hesitation, she said yes. When James came home, I told him my decision. "I'm leaving," I said firmly. "I can't do this anymore." James looked taken aback. "CLA, please don't go. I've begged you to make a change, but you've done nothing." "I need space," I replied, my voice steady. Reluctantly, he let me go. As I drove to Rachel's house, a wave of relief washed over me, though it was tinged with sadness. I loved James, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my sanity for his inability to set boundaries. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding myself. Rachel's unwavering support gave me the strength to breathe freely again. But my respite didn't last long. James began calling relentlessly, leaving voicemails pleading for me to come back. He said his parents would be leaving soon and that things would change. Against my better judgment, I agreed to give him one last chance. When I returned, the atmosphere was tense. Margaret and Harold barely acknowledged me, and James seemed uneasy. But, true to his word, they left a week later, moving in with a distant relative. For a brief moment, I thought we might be able to return to normal. But one evening, as James and I sat down for dinner, there was a loud knock at the door. When James opened it, I saw Margaret and Harold standing there with suitcases in hand. "We had a falling out with Aunt Linda," Margaret announced. "We'll only be here for a few days." My heart sank. I knew then that this nightmare wasn't over. Their few days stretched into weeks. Harold, without consulting us, took it upon himself to overhaul our backyard, digging up the flower beds I'd lovingly tended to. "These flowers are too plain," he remarked. "I'll plant something better." Meanwhile, Margaret decided to redecorate, bringing in her old furniture from storage. One day, I came home to find my dining table replaced with her antique set. "This has more character," she said dismissively when I confronted her. "You'll thank me later." I couldn't believe their audacity. Each day felt like a battle for control of my own home, while James, as usual, remained silent, offering only half-hearted apologies when I pressed him to intervene. One night, I reached my breaking point. I waited until everyone was asleep, then quietly packed my bags. This time, I left a note for James. "I can't do this anymore. I hope you understand." I moved back in with Rachel, determined to make the separation permanent. I sought legal advice and began considering filing for divorce. It was a painful decision, but I knew I deserved better. Weeks later, James showed up at Rachel's house, looking disheveled and desperate. "CLA, please come back," he pleaded. "They're gone for good this time." "How can I trust that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "They've left before and come back. I've made it clear to them. They're not welcome here anymore. Please give me one more chance." Against my better judgment, I agreed to talk. Over the next few days, James worked hard to rebuild my trust, showing me proof that his parents had moved to a retirement community. Slowly, I allowed myself to believe things might finally change. But then, a month later, I received a call from Margaret. "CLA, we need your help," she said. "We're struggling, and James said you'd understand." I hung up without saying a word. That night, I told James, "I'm done. This is over." The next day, I filed for divorce. It was a painful choice, but I knew it was the right one. I deserved peace, and I was determined to find it.